Good afternoon, Peter Goertz. I'm a psychiatrist. Is diagnosing mental illness condescending or demeaning? It certainly can sound that way, and people say things like, he's mental, or a patient told me I was on a psycho ward a few years ago. People made jokes saying, did you take your medication today? Implying that you're crazy. Some people might cringe when they hear, oh, the next patient whom you're going to see is a patient with borderline personality disorder. Now, the DSM has one big advantage, in my opinion, and that is essentially, at least in any diagnosis, in order to be diagnosed, you need to have impairment in functioning. Social, occupational, other important areas of functioning. And that I think is a wonderful thing. So if someone is hearing voices, is having very unusual beliefs that people are after them, aliens put a computer chip in their brain. If someone's having that type of issue, for example, but they're doing well, they're enjoying their work, they're enjoying their family, they're basically enjoying their life, they cannot be diagnosed. So I think that's a big plus with the DSM, that it looks at that aspect. What the DSM lacks, though, is the ability to give you a feeling or a flavor for an individual patient. It will not tell you whether that person has been abused in childhood. It will not tell you who that person is as a human being. And it can be useful, of course, the DSM in treatment. So the DSM diagnosis can help us in treatment in the sense that we want to be as clear as possible when we, for example, prescribe a medication, or when we do psychotherapy. We want to be as clear as possible as to what we're treating. So if someone has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, we might, for example, be quite careful in considering an antidepressant, because an antidepressant for that patient might cause mania for them. So in that sense, the DSM definitely can be helpful. It can help mental health professionals communicate with each other, give them a ballpark idea what a patient is struggling with. One thing that often comes to my mind is, let's say if a patient comes in for an evaluation for ADHD, an adult patient, I do remind myself of the DSM diagnostic criteria, and they do state very clearly that there has to be a history of symptoms and signs in childhood. So that helps me then to, when I look at the patient, let's say an adult patient who wants to receive stimulant treatment for ADHD, that helps me then to think about that very carefully. Let's say if the patient does not have a childhood history of symptoms and signs of ADHD. Now, there may be exceptions, of course, where the DSM does not correctly state things. So there may be some people who develop ADHD in adulthood, but in general, I find the DSM criteria helpful, that they remind us with ADHD that the signs and symptoms do need to start in childhood. And actually, the DSM, I think, only looks at signs, not symptoms for ADHD. Now, we want to be careful ourselves also. Let's say if we've been diagnosed with a mental illness, we don't want to let that define ourselves. So saying, I'm bipolar, or she's schizophrenic, or I'm a diabetic. So even with non-mental health diagnoses, we want to be careful with that type of statement. I don't think that type of statement is helpful. in that it sounds like we're defining ourselves by our diagnoses, whether it's mental health or physical. And what we really are, of course, is human beings. And no one's better than the next person. Everyone's human, and everyone has their own problems, for sure. And in the situation of diabetes, someone might even lose their diagnosis, for example. So if they attend to their health more, make changes in their life, their diet, etc., they may actually down the road no longer be diabetic, but of course they're the same person. So the diagnoses don't define us, and we don't want to buy into that. We don't want to ourselves perpetuate that potential notion that the diagnoses define ourselves as human beings. And they don't define others, of course, either. So when we as doctors talk about patients, we want to remind ourselves also that the diagnoses don't define who the patients are as human beings. So it may be helpful to remind ourselves that the diagnoses, mental health diagnoses, for example, in DSM-5, can help with description and communication, just like, for example, if we say, oh, the patient in the waiting area waiting for you is wearing a blue blouse today. So the diagnoses can help with description and communication, but they don't define who people are as human beings. Thank you.